Welcome to this YouTube live event. And so what we're going to do is discuss Derryl Waters Solar Park. So just as an introduction to Derryl, I'll give you a bit of an overview, and then we'll be answering questions that either you can put in the chat in YouTube. So if you're going to ask a question, you need to be logged in to YouTube. If you're not logged into YouTube, you can ask us a question either via Twitter or via the Ripple community. But yeah, in terms of Derryl, so Derryl is a solar park down, or will be a solar park down in Devon, just to the east of Bude. And it's up to 42 megawatts, so it can generate enough electricity each year for around 14,000 homes, which is incredible. And there'll be about 75,000 solar panels each individual household, if they wanted to own not enough of the solar park to generate all the electricity that they use. They would typically need just over 5 panels, and the upfront cost of that is just around £3,000. And Ripple works, if you're not familiar with how Ripple works, Ripple enables you to own a little bit of Derryl. We've got 2 wind farms, one's operational, one's under construction as well. So you own a little bit of the solar park, and then you get your supplier buys your electricity from your solar park instead of having to buy it from the market, and you get savings applied to your electricity bill as a result of that for the solar park's 40-year lifetime. Now, we launched we opened the share offer for Derryl to people who had reserved a place a couple of weeks ago. We opened it to the public last week. We expect to close it on around the 16th of May. It will then go into construction, and we expect it to start generating electricity in late summer next year. So not this year, late summer 2024. So that's a really quick overview of Derryl. There'll be loads of biodiversity improvements. So at the moment, the land is graded 3 and 4, so that's relatively low quality agricultural land. There's cattle grazing on it at the moment. When the solar park is operational, 96% of the land will still be able to be used for sheep grazing. So it's not, the land isn't being lost to agriculture. It'll just be a dual use pieces of land, so we can have sheep grazing around the panels, which is absolutely fantastic. And there'll also be lots of other habitat improvements. So there'll be things like bee hotels, hedgehog habitats as well, to improve the number of habitats that wildlife can live in the area. So if we move on to some questions, I've got Ellie here with me who can ask me the questions that have been coming in.
So first up, we've got David on Twitter, and he says, Sarah, will all the trees and hedges there at Derryl to be retained for wildlife, and what else are you doing for biodiversity?
Yeah, so there'll be loads of, as I said, loads of biodiversity measures. Vast majority of the trees and hedges will be retained. Some hedges will have to be removed just to increase the access to some of the fields. But where hedges have to be removed, it's only a very small amount. Where they have to be removed, then we have to plant, or we will be planting multiple times the number of meters in terms of new hedges. And there'll be, in terms of other biodiversity improvements, there'll be new grasslands. There'll be, as I said, all the increases in habitats as well. So yeah, we expect a 90% increase in biodiversity across the site.
Great. And next up, in the future, what factors could positively affect the current model to make more of an impact on your monthly bill or the ROI shorter?
So in terms of what could positively impact the economics of the project, so the biggest factor in terms of the payback period and the kind of return on investment is the electricity price. So if the electricity price increases beyond those that we've set out in the share offer document, and those are we set out the government's electricity price forecast because they are publicly available and they're not kind of proprietary from consultants. So if power prices were higher than those levels, then you would expect the savings to be bigger, because the saving is the difference between the power price and the operating cost of the solar park. So if the price is higher, then the savings would be higher, and that would reduce the amount, the sort of payback period, and increase the IRR, or return on investment.
Cool. Next up, what percentage of Derryl has been taken up so far?
So far, we're just getting up to about 50% of the shares being sold. We've had loads of questions saying you're going to put like a totalizer on the website. We're not doing that because the amount that we are sort of tracking is the amount that people have actually bought in shares or they've paid their first instalment, and it doesn't include any large businesses or any potential co-investors. So the number can shoot up very, very quickly once we start getting on board larger investors and larger companies and co-investors. So it's really important that people don't think, okay, right, there's plenty of space in the project, because it can shoot up very quickly, and that's we're not showing the totalizer because it is not necessarily helpful. It doesn't necessarily indicate the level that would be sold by the end of the period.
Cool. So next up, a member on the community has bought into this project, but they're going to move to electric heating in the future. How can they increase their shares? Can they buy into previous projects? And how do they get a mix of wind and solar?
Yeah. So if you've already if your electricity consumption is going to increase, then ordinarily we would increase the amount of shares that you can buy, because that would increase your 120% cap on your ownership. However, we need evidence that your consumption will increase. So you don't have to have already installed your electric heating system or already had like a year's worth of consumption from it, but we just need evidence that you've got one on order, and then an estimate of how much electricity it would use. Obviously, it's not going to the solar park's not going to start generating until late summer next year, so there's time for it to sort of come on board, and you can increase your cap in anticipation of that, but we just need reasonable evidence that that your consumption will be increased. So even if you've just got a vague plan to switch to electric heating, that's kind of not enough evidence. But if you've already put an order in for a heat pump or other electric heating systems, then you can just show us that receipt, and then we can use that as evidence. And then in terms of becoming members of other projects, so at the moment, because there's such a massive demand from existing members of the current co-ops for on the waiting list for Greig Bather and Kirkhill, we're only going to make the waiting list available to existing co-op members until all those co-op members have kind of got what they want. But the Kirkhill waiting list, I think, is about 13,000 or 1,300 people, not 13,000, 1,300 people. So there's a very long waiting list. Once the waiting list is all used up with existing members, then we would look to sort of open it up to non-existing members. But that said, as well, Ripple is planning to do more and more projects in time. That'll be more solar parks, more wind farms as well. So we can't say now what project 4 is going to be, whether it's going to be a solar park or a wind farm. But you could reasonably expect there to be a wind farm coming along at some point in the future.
Great. And one of the questions we had from the last webinar was, how would shared solar savings compare with one of Ripple's wind farm projects?
Yeah. So in terms of the savings, so the savings are the difference between the market power price and the operating cost of the wind farm or the solar park. The operating cost of the wind farm and the solar parks are very similar. So your yearly savings would not be that dissimilar from each other. You get a slight variation in electricity prices in the summer compared to in the winter. So that may lead to a slight variation in the kind of value across the whole year of the electricity from the solar park. But yeah, there wouldn't be a very large difference between the two, because ultimately the prices are driven by the wholesale market, and even if there's a tiny difference between winter prices and summer prices, it wouldn't feed through to a huge difference in the savings that you would get on your bills.
Cool. And next question, does the payback period take inflation into account?
So the payback period does not take inflation into account, and the estimate of the savings that you would get from your ownership doesn't take inflation into account. And the reason that we kind of ignore inflation is that over 40 years, if we assumed inflation was 2% or 1.8% or 2.2% or 5% like it is at the moment, it would have such a huge impact on the actual projected level of savings that it would be really open to error, because you could debate whether it should be 2% or 1.8%, or whether it was 2% or 1.8% would have a big impact on the estimated level of saving. So we kind of just ignore it and do everything in real term prices. However, if we did include inflation over that 40-year period, the level of savings that we would estimate you would get would be significantly higher than they are at the moment. But because we wanted to have the modelling being neat and not subject to the numbers being really dependent on one assumption over what the level of inflation will be over 40 years, we kind of kept things really simple and ignored inflation, even though it would significantly increase the kind of number that we would be estimating in terms of your lifetime savings.
Great. And so the next question is, what has the uptake of the project been like? Classed as local. There's a few people in the comments saying they can't hear me asking the question.
Oh, okay.
So just repeat the question.
Okay.
Yeah, what's the local uptake like?
So in terms of the local uptake, we've had, I can't remember the exact number, we've had a number of people in the local area, including businesses as well. So households in the local area, and then also we've got some businesses who are looking to join as well, which is absolutely fantastic. So we're looking to just increase the awareness within the local area. So we had an issue with some of we sent out leaflets to be distributed in the local area, and there was a problem with people not necessarily all getting those leaflets. So we're now looking at how we can engage with the local community, whether that's through different Facebook groups or more awareness in the press as well. So yeah, we're really keen for people in the local area to get involved, and we are now looking at how we can increase awareness to maximise the number of local people joining in.
Cool, fantastic. And this is a question from William. What happens if suppliers decide not to work with Ripple?
So this question is, what happens if suppliers choose to not work with Ripple in future? So if for whatever reason a supplier decided to not work with Ripple anymore, then you would need to switch to another one of our supply partners. However, that said, we are planning on increasing, not decreasing, the number of suppliers that we're working with, and we are in discussions with a number about them coming on board as well.
Fantastic. And this is another question from William. When the 40-year period is up, will there be any assets remaining belonging to the co-op, and what happens?
Right. So this question is, after the 40-year period, will there be any assets left, and will they belong to the co-op, and if so, what happens to them? So the panels are expected to operate for 40 years. The co-op owns panels, they own the project. So if it is decided that actually there's another, 2, 3, 4, 5 years left in the panels, and they can operate for a longer period of time beyond the 40 years, then they can carry on doing that. The co-op would still own the panels. However, the planning consent is only for 40 years. So if it looked like there was life left in the panels after 40 years, then the co-op would need to apply to the local authority to extend the planning permission, because as it is, the planning permission says that the panels have to be decommissioned after 40 years. So there would need to be, it would all be subject to an amendment to the planning permission that the solar farms got. But yeah, the co-op owns the assets. It's not like, I think we've had people suggesting or thinking that Ripple then sort of takes over after 40 years. That does not happen. The co-op owns the asset. It is the co-op's, and if the life can be extended, then the co-op would be able to do that, subject to securing the relevant planning permission.
Cool. So next up, we've got a question about suppliers. He's a member of Kirk Hill and he's bought into these shares. He's on Octopus Flux. Is that an issue?
Right. So this is a question about different tariffs, and the question asker is on Octopus Flux. Is that an issue? So no, it is not. So Ripple works with any of our suppliers' tariffs, so any of Octopus's tariffs. Doesn't matter whether you're on different time of use tariffs, if it's a 12-month fix, if it's a 24-month fix, if it's variable, your savings are applied to your bill. So it's not a sort of change to your tariff. Your tariff is whatever your tariff is. That leads to whatever your bill is, depending on your usage. And then your Ripple savings are applied to your Octopus account effectively. So there's no restriction to the kind of tariffs you can be on, or when you use electricity or how much you use. Your savings are driven by your generation from your solar park.
Cool. So next up, why is the predicted saving in year 1 greater than that in year 2?
Right, so this question is about why the saving in year 1 is bill saving in year 1 is predicted to be higher than in year 2. And the answer to that is that electricity prices are coming down from their historic high that they have been over the last kind of 18 months. So what we've done is we've reflected that in the prices. So, prices in 2024 are expected to be a lot higher than sort of in later years. So we've kind of reflected that in the savings because your savings in the first year would be higher because we expect them to be higher because prices would be higher. As prices start to come down, which will ease everyone's electricity bills across the country, then your savings would come down. But we've tried to reflect that in the estimates of savings.
Cool, fantastic. And how does Ripple compare with installing your own solar or your own battery over the 40 years?
So this question is about how Ripple compares to owning your own solar or battery over the 40 years. Now, obviously with Ripple, it doesn't matter where you live in England, Wales or Scotland, what type of property you live in. You can rent, you can live in an apartment. If you move, it's portable, it goes with you. Whereas with home solar, it's attached to your home, and similarly with your battery, if you move, you probably have to leave it behind. Solar only works if you've got access to your roof, which is often not possible for people that live in flats. And biggest difference as well is that home solar and a battery, depending on the size, you could be looking at sort of, £4,000, £5,000, £6,000, £7,000 for some solar panels, and then significantly more for your battery. Whereas with Ripple, the cost for a typical household to generate as much electricity as they need from their solar park is around £3,000 as the upfront cost. In terms of the ongoing savings with solar, your savings really depend on when you use electricity. So if you've got a battery and you can be keeping all of that electricity that you generate behind your meter, so you're offsetting at the retail price, your savings could be more significant, but you need to ensure you have a battery in order to do that, which significantly increases the upfront cost. Whereas with Ripple, it doesn't matter when you use electricity. Even if you don't use any electricity in a month, you would still get all your savings from your solar park. So the savings with solar can be higher on an ongoing basis, provided that you've got the ability to keep all of your or use all of your electricity rather than exporting it to the grid. If you export it to the grid, you would just get whatever your smart export guarantee amount is. Whereas with Ripple, it doesn't matter what your home setup is. You don't need any batteries. You don't need any kit in your home. You can move home, live in a flat, live behind a massive tree that's casting shade over your roof. It's really, really flexible. So they're similar in the case that, solar on your roof generates electricity for you, and solar from your solar park generates green electricity for you as well. But the details of it are very, very different. There is on the Energy Saving Trust website, there's a kind of, it's not a comparison of Ripple and home solar, but it kind of explains what the savings from home solar can be, whether you've got a battery or not, whether you're out during the day, or there's lots of different factors to be taken into account. So we recommend that you check that out as well. But yeah, they're two different things. Obviously, they work really well together as well. So if you've got home solar, you can still own a bit of a solar park, and savings will just get applied to your electricity bill, ready for use in the winter.
Great. So we've got another question from someone who signed up and they're with Octopus. Do they need to tell Octopus anything? And how does it all work with Octopus?
Right. So this question is: somebody signed up, they're with Octopus. Do they need to do anything? Tell Octopus that they're with Ripple, or anything else? So the answer is no, you don't. So what we do is, over the construction period, we will get in contact with Octopus. We'll link up your accounts. We'll give them your address, and then we can link up your accounts. And then once the solar park is generating, you'll then be able to just get savings applied to your electricity bill direct. If for whatever reason there's an issue, maybe the address doesn't quite match, then we may need to get in contact with you to get your Octopus account number. But ordinarily, we can just sort it all out with Octopus. You don't need to do anything yourself.
Great. So next question is about grid connections. Do we have an agreed contractual timeline for the grid connection?
So this is probably a better one for Simon to answer than me. But yeah, in terms of the grid connection is very close to the substation, and we've got a grid connection date, which is expected to be the end of the summer. But if there's any change to that, we would obviously let people know. But yeah, we are not expecting there to be necessarily delays to getting the project connected.
Fantastic. So we've got one from Christopher that says Ripple does not seem like a wise investment. So do you want to talk a little bit about how Ripple isn't an investment and what that looks like?
Yeah, so this is a question from Christopher saying that Ripple doesn't look like a very wise investment. So Ripple isn't an investment vehicle. It's really, really important that people recognise that. It's a way for people to collectively own their own source of clean, low-cost electricity. And the benefits of doing so in terms of saving on your bills are directly related to the wholesale price of electricity. We set out the motivations for getting involved with Ripple are primarily the climate benefits. Obviously, we expect there to be significant bill savings as well. But in terms of the key drivers for people to get involved, then we expect that to be climate impacts and then bill savings as well. So, Ripple isn't for everyone, and we completely understand that, and we get that, and we do not say Ripple necessarily is for everyone. If you think you can get a better use of your money elsewhere, then obviously you're completely free to do that. So in terms of our members, primary reason for them to get involved is to act on climate change, and then also as a secondary benefit is saving money on their electricity bill and stabilising their electricity bill for the long term.
Great, fantastic. And there's another one from the webinar of someone who's on a time of use tariff. And how do their savings work with their nighttime cheaper electricity rate?
Yeah, so this is a question about time of use tariffs and how do the savings relate to their nighttime tariff rates, basically. So there's no relationship at all. So like I said, so if you're on a time of use tariff and you're getting really cheap electricity overnight, absolutely fantastic. So you get a nice low electricity bill. And then whatever your Ripple savings are, if your Ripple savings 1 month is £50, you get that £50 applied to your electricity bill, whether your electricity bill is £60 and bringing it down to £10, or whether your electricity bill is £100 and it would bring it down to £50. So it doesn't matter whether you're on nighttime tariff, EV special tariff, fixed tariff, variable tariff, your savings are just applied to your bill regardless of what tariff you're on, how much electricity you've used. You just get the savings applied to your bill. So you don't lose out on any savings. If your savings, for whatever reason, so I was speaking to somebody at the weekend and they're on, I think, Octopus Intelligent, paying about 7p for most of their electricity, and then they're getting savings from the Greg Vather wind farm at about 27p. So they're extremely happy about that. So it's not that your savings, if your savings are greater than your whole bill, you'll lose any. It would just be the equivalent of overpaying on a direct debit.
Cool. So next up, what happens if they downsize in the future?
Yeah, so this question is, what happens if you downsize in the future and your electricity consumption reduces? So the alternative scenario is you move to a bigger house, or you get an EV, or you switch to a heat pump and your consumption increases. If that happens, your the cap on ownership, which is 120% equivalent of your electricity consumption, if your consumption goes up, then your cap would go up. So you'd be able to buy shares in later projects as well. However, in the reverse, we don't make people give up any shares. So if you move from a massive house to a small house and your consumption reduces, we don't reduce your cap downwards. So it doesn't have any impact on the amount of ownership that you can have.
Great, fantastic. And if sheep and cattle are able to graze in and amongst panels, how do you stop them eating the panels or eating the trees?
So this is a question about sheep and cattle grazing in between the panels, and how do we stop them eating the cabling, basically. So it's not cattle. There's not going to be any cattle in the solar park. It's only sheep. I think sheep are better neighbours to solar panels than cows would be. And all the equipment is underground. So all the wires, there's not sort of wires trailing around that sheep would be able to eat. The wires are go into the ground, and then they go to the substation and the inverters on site that way. So yeah, we do not expect sheep to be biting through any cables. And we've had sheep at Greg Vather. There's loads and loads of sheep at the site as well, and they live very, very happily with the wind farm.
Cool. So next up, is there any indication of how Rima will impact
So this is a question about Rima, which is the review of electricity market arrangements. One bit of Rima is that it wants to decouple gas prices from electricity prices. And another is to split the electricity market up into 7 or 200 or 300 different zones. So there's a lot of, there's not much clarity at the moment about what Rima is going to look like and which version of it is going to be implemented. So at the moment, we haven't taken it into account. We've just based all of the savings on the current electricity price and the electricity market. So we'll be keeping members updated once there's more clarity on what Rima looks like, essentially.
Great. So the next one, if shares can be transferred upon death and other circumstances, why can't we transfer shares to a partner to avoid tax?
Right, so this is a question about share transfers and why you can only transfer shares upon death. So the rules of the co-op are that the shares are withdrawable but non-transferable, and this is part of the how co-ops are regulated. So it's a really, really important distinction. We do not set these rules. They are set by the Financial Conduct Authority, but it's a really, really important part of the co-op that these shares are non-transferable. So if shares were able to be transferred, then you can kind of sell them to somebody else. You cannot sell your shares to somebody else. You can withdraw your shares, in which case you have to withdraw all your shares. The only time in which you can transfer shares to somebody else is if you die, and then they would just be transferred as part of your estate. We've had to do that a couple of times. It's very, very simple, but yeah, it's always going to be the case that the Ripple co-op shares are not transferable to other people. So there will never there'll never be like a secondary market in shares where people can just sell their shares to the highest bidder. It's a really, really important part of the structure of the co-op.
Great, fantastic. And the next one, how many shares can you buy and how much is it?
So in terms of how many shares you can buy, that would be however much of the solar park would generate 120% of your consumption. So there's not a flat amount across everyone. The amount of shares depends on how much electricity you use. So if you used 3,000 kilowatt hours of electricity per year, you would be able to buy enough shares to generate 3,000 kilowatt hours per year plus 20%, so 3,600 kilowatt hours per year. That would be very, very roughly around, cost you around £3,600, and it would be very roughly around 3,600 watts of the solar park. If you only used 1,000 kilowatt hours a year, you would only be able to own as much as would generate 1,200 kilowatt hours in a year. If you already had shares in Greg Vather and Kirkhill of 1,000 kilowatt hours in that situation, you would only be able to buy shares that would generate the equivalent of 200 kilowatt hours, because that would then get you up to your 120% cap. So yeah, it's completely dependent on your electricity consumption and how many shares you've already got, because your 120% cap applies across all your Ripple projects, not just Daryl. So if you already own bits of Greg Vather and Kirkhill, they will count towards your 120% cap as well.
Cool. So there's a question on Twitter about the negative environmental impacts and how we offset them and sort of what the embodied carbon bill is.
Yeah, so this is a question about the negative impacts of solar parks on the environment and the embodied carbon within the solar panels itself. So in terms of the environmental impacts of solar parks, these are all taken care of and considered as part of the planning consent, and you do not get projects do not get planning consent if the environmental impacts are considered to outweigh the benefits from a climate perspective. So obviously, Daryl Water will be saving thousands and thousands of tons of CO2 every single year. That is a huge, huge climate impact. In terms of the embodied carbon, obviously, there is carbon associated with the manufacture of panels, transportation to site, and the construction, just as there is with every single other product in the economy. Now, in terms of the time it takes for the zero carbon generation from the solar park to outweigh the emissions associated with the manufacture and construction and transportation of the panels. It depends on lots of things, but generally it's considered to be around 1 to 4 years. So given that the solar park lasts for 40 years, it's a pretty short amount of time before it's well into kind of, very, very significant savings, even taking account of the emissions associated with the production of the panels.
Great, so I'm conscious of time. So we're going to wrap up with one final question. There's a few more questions about how many shares have been purchased, when will the share offer close, what happens if we don't fill it. So for those who didn't see the start, should we just finish with a wrap up of who's joined and what the next few weeks look like?
Yeah, so just to wrap up, there's been more questions on the percentage sold and what happens when the share offer closes. So we're expecting to close the share offer around the 16th of May. At the moment, we're getting up to about 50% of the shares being sold, but we're not publishing a sort of totalizer amount because that only includes all the people that have actually bought their shares, joined the co-op and sort of paid either the full amount of money or their first instalment. So it doesn't reflect any of the, if a large business or a large co-investor got involved, that number could jump up very, very quickly. And we don't want to give people the wrong impression about, how quickly it might be filling up. So we're expecting to close around mid-May. It could be sooner if, like I said, we get large co-investors and large businesses on board. And if there is any gap after the 16th of May, then we will be able to secure finance to fill in the gap, just like we have with at Kirkhill as well.
Great, so there's quite a few questions we haven't. So just if anyone's got more questions, come on customer service or we can do another one.
So yeah, there's been more questions that we haven't got time to answer now, but if you've got a burning question, please do get in contact with customer service or jump on the community and we can answer them there. But yeah, thank you so much for joining today. And if you've got any more questions, just jump on chat and we can answer them there. But yeah, we do hope as many of you as possible can get involved with Daryl because we are extremely excited about the UK's first ever shared solar park.